Hi, everyone. Welcome to Politics and Prose. My name is Mishi. I am an actor, a human rights researcher, and a bookseller here. And tonight we're excited to welcome Oscar nominated filmmaker John Sayles, celebrating the release of his new novel, Crucible, a complex and sweeping historical novel centered on Henry Ford at the height of his influence, examining not only the rise of an automotive empire, but Ford's efforts to exert control over a city, a workforce, and the terms of American industrial life. The novel moves between Detroit during the Great Depression and Fordlandia, Ford's ill fated attempt to establish a rubber plantation in the Amazon. Across these settings, Sayles explores labor conflict, surveillance, propaganda, and the mechanisms used to maintain power in moments of economic and social instability. John Sayles is an independent filmmaker, screenwriter, actor, and novelist. He has been nominated twice for the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay and once for the National Book Award. He has written 8 novels, including Jamie McIlvray and To Save the Man. Before we get started, please silence your cell phones, and when we get to the Q&A portion, please line up at the microphone by the pillar to ask your questions. So please join me in welcoming John Sayles to Politics and Prose.
Hey, everybody. The book takes place between 1927 and 1942 in Detroit and Brazil. And I'm going to read you a little section of it that takes place in 1932. There's no FDR yet. We're still in the depths of the Depression. It's the dead of winter. It's March. And the 3 characters you're going to meet, one is Rosa Schimmel, who's 19 years old. She's a young radical. At this moment, she's still a member of the Communist Party, but always up for a march or anything else like that. Smitty is a World War I vet and a hard-boiled reporter from the Detroit Free Press. And then there'll be a little appearance by a guy named Harry Bennett. And Harry Bennett was Henry Ford's, he was the head of employment. So to get a job, you had to go see Harry Bennett. He was the head of security. And he was basically Henry Ford's enforcer. There need to be women. Women work too in the home, in the factories. Some, like Rosa, in restaurants or hospitals or plugging wires into a switchboard. And a lot of them who should be out working are unemployed now, and if truly cursed by capitalism, evicted from their dwellings to face this bitter cold. It is freezing. Rosa and her brother Iris stomping their feet in place, breath hopping out in white puffs as they wait for the show to get on the road, surrounded by hundreds of men and a few women in their heaviest coats with collars turned up, their hats pulled low against the wind, ready to march. There's still time to go back, says Ira. He's not chickening out, just going on about how it might get violent and she'll be unable to protect herself. I don't see any weapons, she says. Almost all the men not wearing gloves have their hands buried deep in their pockets, and the flimsy sticks the placards are hung on won't be much in a fight. I'm not talking about us. We're going to Dearborn. Different rules out there. I'll be fine, says Rosa. Look how many we are. She was hoping only for a couple hundred, but already there must be over 1,000 crowded onto the grass of the park. The Detroit police that Mayor Murphy says will be their escort, standing in clusters at the edge of Fort Street. Now and again, a streetcar stops at the corner of Downing, and several men jump off without paying the fare, maybe 1 or 2 cops making a half-hearted chase until the chiselers are safe within the cheering crowd. Maybe it was the speech that Foster gave at the Danceland Arena last night, or maybe these are just men with nothing else to do, with no job to report to, more bored and curious than committed to the future. It really doesn't matter. They've come. Joe York, tall and thin and intense, is up at the head of the street with Getz and some of the other organizers. He is a very serious young man, which Rosa likes, but he never really looks at her during meetings. Maybe he's shy too. A group of the men who say they all worked at Ford until recently are singing the song that's been going around. I'm spending my night at the flop house. I'm spending my days on the street. I'm looking for work and I find none. I wish I had something to eat. Her family has only been over from Chicago for a few years, Papa fleeing from a deportation order, but long enough to know that winter here is just as cold, just as windy. Soup, soup, they give me a bowl of soup. Soup, soup, they give me a bowl of soup. Albert Getz is shouting over a bullhorn now, the hunger march scheduled to start moving at noon, which passed a while back. People are still arriving. Are we ready? Calls Getz, a roar of readiness. Remember, this is a peaceful assembly. We march out to the gate, present our demands, and disperse. Let's move it out. Another cheer, and the shivering mass of them shift into Fort Road, the police making way for them, the beefy Irish sergeant nearest Rosa and Ira grinning and shaking his head. You people only done this so we'd have to freeze our nuts off, right? You think Henry Ford is going to come out and invite you in for tea? If it's all of us and we shout together, says one of the recently fired auto workers, he'll at least hear us over the factory noise. It takes a while, so many trying to squeeze onto the pavement at once. And when they actually start to move toward the plant, Rosa finds she is walking aside Joe York. She knows that his family is Polish and changed their name, as did her own, Schimmelman to Schimmel, but thinks the Yorks are Catholics. Joe, in one of his many direct quotes from Marx, has said that religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people, which seems at once sympathetic and dismissive. Papa still goes to Temple Beth El on Woodward, but only to argue with Rabbi Franklin about what it should mean to be a Jew. You communists are too sure of everything for a good argument, Papa tells her, but the rabbi knows that life is mystery. Only a little up the road, they encounter the strange sight of Mayor Murphy standing up in an open car, lifting his hat despite the cold and the wind to wish them well. I'm with you all the way, he calls. Joe York makes a derisive noise. If he's with us, he should be marching. He gave us a permit, Ira says to Joe York, a permit to march out of his city limits. He's done what he can for relief. Electoral politics, says Joe with finality, is a dead end. You don't believe in democracy? Rosa has only managed to steer Ira to one CP meeting, and he came out complaining that he couldn't breathe for the hot air expelled during the long debates. You'll see when we get to the Dearborn line, says Joe York. We've got no permit there. The mayor of Dearborn is Henry Ford's cousin and owns a Ford dealership, and the chief of police used to work for their service department. When we get to Dearborn, you'll see democracy in action. Rosa, the bickering making her anxious, turns to walk backward and read the placards being held up, the bearers wrestling to keep them aloft in the stiff wind. We want bread, not crumbs. Tax the rich and feed the poor. Starve in the richest land on earth? We want jobs. There are the usual red banners and signs urging support for the Scottsboro boys, but most of the faces she sees aren't political activists. They're the forgotten man, out of work, out of a home in many cases, shameful at being desperate. The men she sees peeling scraps of hot, half-rotten food off the ground when the Eastern market is about to close. The vendors leaving what they can't sell and won't eat. Rosa was in on the debate over what demands would be, taking notes. Two 15-minute breaks a day instead of one, a 7-hour shift without reduction in pay, end to the speed-ups, abolition of the graft system of hiring, the right to organize without interference or punishment, and above all, the dismissal of Harry Bennett and his service department of snoops and thugs. Others were to alleviate the suffering of those Ford considers no longer needed, the unemployed, a lump sum of $50, free medical care in Henry Ford Hospital, 5 tons of free coal and coke handed out for the winter, and an end to evictions and foreclosures. Rosa was thrilled that her idea, no discrimination against Negroes for all jobs in the plant, was seconded by Joe York and adopted by a narrow margin. There are only a handful of Negroes in the party in Detroit, and very few, considering how many of them are now jobless, among the throng moving up Fort Street to the Ford plant. They are supposed to be walking 8 abreast, but that is quickly broken down. The line ahead and behind now just a jumble of bundled-up marchers filling the road from side to side, a pair of Detroit motorcycle policemen cruising back and forth along the margins. Ira thinks the answer is syndicalism. We get a union in at Federal Screw, he was always saying where he worked before. We got a shot at a decent living. Most of his fellow workers agreed with him, but at least one of them went to management, saying Ira Schimmel is a red. Ira Schimmel is trying to organize, and Ira Schimmel was out on the street. Chicken sticking neck out, their mother would say to Papa when he'd come home late from a meeting, is losing head. The marchers have become a powerful river now, Rosa exhilarated to be part of it. So many bodies pushing forward from behind that if you stop moving, you'll be swept off your feet or crushed under theirs. Democracy, announces Joe York suddenly, having had time for analysis of the problem, will be vital to the workers' republic once we establish it. But for now, discipline, clarity, action. I'm all for the action part, says Ira, hunched shuddering in a coat not nearly thick enough for the day. If we don't keep moving, we'll die out here. There are men in uniforms lined up in front of the bridge going over the Rouge River. Rosa and Ira follow Joe York, who is pushing his way toward the front of the march. The Detroit police and the 2 motorcyclists are nowhere to be seen now. You stay right behind me, sis, no matter what, Ira tells her. Grab onto my coat if you have to. There is a fire engine just behind the Dearborn police, firemen hurrying to link a hose to a hydrant. Ira's coat doesn't have a belt to grab, and she loses him, now just trying to keep Joe York in sight, struggling to follow him even though he's moving toward the trouble instead of away from it. The first canister sizzles past her ear and hits an older marcher square in the chest, knocking him to the ground as the tear gas starts to spread and rise in the wind. Smitty always carries an oversized handkerchief, good for comforting grieving gun mauls, now plastered over his face as he kneels in the field beside Fort Road, eyes only watering a bit as the wind swirls the gas around and, if anything, sends it back upon the fearless public servants who fired it into an unarmed crowd of no-hopers. Action. But even with scareheads and the usual editorial warning about a red takeover, the Lindbergh toddler will still get all the front page ink tomorrow. The kidnappers, whoever they are, sending a second ransom note just yesterday to up their demand to 70,000 G's. And Smitty is deep in the doghouse again with his editor Fosdick, who spends his evenings at the Free Press cooking up the dirtiest, noisiest, freezingest situations to throw him into. Like this. Hundreds of the common unemployed herd around him are picking up or digging up rocks from the field and hurling them with some accuracy at the boys in blue. Smitty was in a similar situation during the Muse Our Gun campaign, only then he had a gas mask and an Enfield rifle to protect himself with. The thin blue line begins to buckle just as their brothers in the fire department get the hose working. turning it on the closest marchers and knocking more than a few on their keisters. But the hook and ladder boys don't like the shower of rocks and frozen dirt clods any better than the cops do. And soon the whole official Dearborn contingent are beating a hasty retreat. A huge cheer. Banners flapping, placards held high, the usual ruckus before the Cossacks ride in with their sabers unsheathed. Instead, a beanpole of a kid wearing a beret waves his arms in front of the agitated masses and poses a rhetorical question. Workers, comrades, what do we do now? March on, cry the army of the unemployed and begin to hightail it for the bridge, some of them thoroughly soaked with patches of ice forming on their skin and clothing. Smitty holds on to his hat and joins the advance. There is always, of course, a fallback position for the enemy, and as soon as he turns left up Miller Road with the horde, Smitty can see it. More uniformed coppers, plus an equal number of Harry Bennett's plainclothes persuaders, bats, metal pipes, and yes, a few shotguns in hand, standing atop and below the walkover bridge from the parking lot to Gate 4, with the employment building just beyond it, and count 'em, two fire trucks with their hoses already loaded for action. This will not end well, thinks Smitty, drifting purposefully out of the line of fire, where he can function better as a professional observer and not get clubbed, doused, or shot by the guardians of private property and the American way. There is not much of a conversation when the vanguard of the march come into range of the overpass. More tear gas fired, streams of water unleashed, rocks and chunks of concrete flying in the opposite direction, curses shouted, screaming, some of the defenders of the realm charging forward to bust heads, and now the factory gate opening, and some idiot wearing a bow tie driving out into the eye of the shitstorm. If Smitty's view is not distorted by his stinging, tear-filled eyes, it is no ordinary idiot in the passenger seat, but Harry Bennett. You have to look them in the eye, as Clyde Beatty always says. Clyde is a pal, helped Harry pick out the big cats he keeps just down the tunnel from his office. Always good for a giggle to bring in on a leash if there's a visitor you want to rattle. Mastery, Clyde calls it, but to Harry, that just means fear. They've ignored the whip in the chair, Harry thinks as he steps out of the car. Let's see how they like the pistol. Rosa can barely see. Her eyes hurt so much worse when they're open. Her plush hat long gone, her hair crisp with tiny icicles from the first hosing. But she can hear Joe York and the little man with the bow tie shouting at each other. And then rocks come flying overhead, smashing glass and metal on the car. And the man with the bow tie is hit on the head and grabs Joe, both of them going down, and gunshots now, even a machine gun rattling away like in the movies, and somebody pushes her to the ground, and she sees Joe York stand up only to go down again, and he's bleeding. She crawls to him as people all around her, marchers, police, men with metal pipes, fight and run and shout at each other, and random shots now and screams of pain, not anger, and she is helping a marcher drag Joe away from the fighting, holding him under one arm and backing up, the man doing the same on the other side. And it's awful the way Joe's eyes are open, but his head lolls sideways like he's drunk or asleep, and somebody has come up with a car. Rosa jumps in next to the driver and helps pull Joe in beside her, hot blood on her cold hands. And there are 3 badly wounded men in the back seat already, and the man who is driving manages to turn the car around without running over anybody, a Dearborn policeman slamming dents in the roof with his club, and then spider cracking the rear window before they can start back down Miller. The driver keeps jamming his hand on the horn to keep marchers out of their way, and rolls down her window to yell, "Wounded! Wounded! Wounded!" taking a hard left on Dix Avenue, then speeding away toward Detroit. Then somewhere a hard, squealing right turn, and the door must not have been slammed shut because Joe almost falls out of the side before Rosa can yank him back in, with one of the other wounded men beginning to scream hysterically, "Joe's dying! He's dying! You gotta help him! He's dying!" Till Rosa has to turn and slap him so he can't make the driver slam into something. The driver keeps the heel of his hand on the horn as they go through stoplights and crossroads without slowing down. And there is blood actually squirting, like from a child's water gun toy, out of Joe's body onto Rosa. And she searches for the source, trying to unbutton his blood-drenched coat to find the wound. But first, they jolt to a stop in front of the hospital, Henry Ford Hospital. There are doctors and nurses in white already outside, so somebody must have called. But when Rosa, drenched in blood, yells for them to come get the wounded, they just stand gaping, afraid perhaps. But of what? "Please," she cries to them, "help them. They're so young." The wounded boy in the middle of the back seat, who hasn't said a thing but just held his stomach with both hands, is barely in his teens. Joe is slumped over in Rosa's arms, and she can't move. "Some of you must have children," she cries, "please." It seems like an eternity. Rosa pleading, the driver out of the car and demanding that they do their duty, till they finally give in to the sound of approaching sirens. "All right, bring him in," scowls a doctor. And Rosa follows as Joe and the others are pulled out of the car, several Dearborn policemen appearing beside them as they move through reception. Rosa taking Joe's hand once they have him on a stretcher and walking alongside back toward the operating rooms. "Have you been shot?" asked a nurse. And Rosa has to think for a second. "I don't think so." "Then you'll have to leave us." Joe's hand is cold and stiff in hers. She has to peel his fingers off to let him go. She is on her way toward the door, not knowing what to do next, when more wounded, mostly from beatings, are dragged in. Ira is among them, barely conscious, held up by a pair of Dearborn police. "That's my brother," she shouts. "What did you do to him?" The cops ignore her all the way down the hall to a room with 4 beds in it, 2 of them already occupied by bloodied marchers. They dump Ira onto an empty bed, throw his feet up onto it, then handcuff him to the sidebar. "You can't do that." "What has he done? None of us had weapons. You can't do this." One of the Dearborn cops wearily pushes her back into the hallway before closing the door behind him. "Go home, girlie," he says. "We had enough for one day." Thanks. So that became known as the Ford Hunger March. I think 4 people were killed. 4 of the marchers were killed. And then there was a huge funeral parade. And only a few years later, when the workers at Ford finally got really fed up, and not so much with the job as Harry Bennett and his guys, uh, they walked around. They didn't have Ford badges. They had their own kind of badge. Um, if you went to the bathroom, not only did the foreman have a stopwatch timing how long you were off the line and how long it took back, but when you went in and you sat on the toilet, the stalls had no doors. So you're trying to do your business, and there's a guy watching you like this, to make sure you didn't talk to anybody and, plan to have a union. So finally, the UAW got a little traction, and they were told by at least the people in Detroit, "Oh, you can go out there and you can hand out leaflets on that same bridge that all this action happened at, between the parking lot and the factory itself that went over a highway." And the bridge had been built by Ford, but it had been leased to the railroad, so it was public property. And that ended up in something that got known as the Battle of the Overpass. And there were some famous photographs taken of Harry Bennett's thugs beating the living hell out of Walter Reuther and some of the other UAW guys. Anyway, so any questions about any of this? It's a fraction of what's in the book. Oh, that's right. You have to go to the microphone.
Hi, my name's Aviva Kempner. I
Hi,
grew up
Aviva.
in Detroit.
Yeah.
I used to have Passover with some of the Ruthers. I also, 25 years ago, made the film on Hank Greenberg. So I'm thrilled how you end the. Oh, I shouldn't say it.
Yeah.
Everyone buy the book just for that. And the
Yeah,
big
Hank
fan.
makes an appearance.
Yes, yes. What I find interesting, talk about appearances, because now I'm even doing a film on Ben Hecht, and Ford again comes up, and there's a new film by Galen Ross about the man who sued Henry Ford. Why do you think, I have a theory, that all of a sudden Henry Ford is making such a prominent appearances again?
You know, he was one of the last of the, we thought, one of the last
That-
of those kind of robber barons. The auto industry was getting very, very corporate at the time, as were other industries. Henry Ford had made life so miserable for the few people who helped finance him in the beginning that he'd driven them all away. So he owned that company lock, stock, and barrel. He had like 52% of the stock. His son, Edsel, had 48% of it. And Edsel pretty much was afraid of his father and did whatever he wanted him to. I think that kind of concentration of wealth, and not just that the people are controlling so much, but that they have it in their heads, kind of like Elon Musk does, is, well, everything I've touched has turned into gold. I know how people should live. Why don't I tell them? And if they won't listen, why doesn't somebody give me a position where I could make them do what's good for them? And I think there's some of that in people's reaction to Henry Ford of, oh my God, you say Detroit and you think automobiles, Ford, Henry Ford.
And he also had the Protocols of Zion for free. He's a total proponent, of
Yeah,
them.
and I do think that's the other part of it, which was that wittingly or unwittingly, I think a lot of what he did was out of ignorance, not so much malice. He helped spread a lot of really damaging stuff. He and Father Kaufman were
Coughlin,
the two
yeah.
guys in Detroit.
And they used to go to the baseball game and watch Hank Greenberg.
Yes.
And and growing up, every time we passed the Shrine of the Little Flower, my father would raise his hand, that anti-Semit. However, I will say that the church itself of the Shrine of the Little Flower has taken one line out. It used to say allegedly anti-Semite, Father Coughlin. They took the word allegedly
Oh,
out.
good. That's good.
Anyhow,
Progress.
everyone should buy the book.
Progress. Thanks, Avia. Hi.
Hello, my name's Andrew. I'm a big fan of your film Mate One, which I might have mispronounced. Sorry if I did. I wanted to ask, you seem to. What is the biggest difference in your eyes between writing a screenplay and a novel? Since you've done both several times now.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of artistically, I guess I could use that word. When I write a screenplay, even though probably most people don't watch movies this anyway, trying to write a movie, I'm thinking about time. I'm thinking about, okay, this is going to be about 2 hours and 5 minutes or whatever. What's going to happen in the first 10 minutes? You have to think about that rhythm of a movie. When is the plot information released? When is the emotional, information released? When you write a book like this, which is over 200 pages long, and I've written books that were 800, 1,000 pages long, people are not going to read them in one sitting, I hope. So you have a different relationship with time. When they start to get long, you have to do things like, oh, I think I'm going to have to give the reader a little reminder of who this person is. If it's Henry Ford, they'll know. But if it's one of the characters that I've kind of made out of composites, I want to give them a little help in remembering. Oh, yeah, 150 pages or so, this person showed up, and that's what they do. So you have to do those kind of things. Whereas in a movie, oh, it's George Clooney again. And people half the time don't even know the character's name. That was the guy George Clooney's playing, or whoever the actor is. I did have that problem though on the movie of 8 Men Out, because I had probably about 12 of these ball players, white guys with short haircuts, in the days before they had numbers on their jerseys. And so I introduced them all 3 times before the action really started.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Appreciate it.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much. You are obviously extraordinarily productive, and the works that you do are very plot heavy. They're very character heavy. They're very history heavy. I'm not going to ask you about your method or something like that, but for us mortals, I'll ask 2 questions. Question one: when do you get stuck in your creative process, and how do you get unstuck? So that's question 1. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll answer that first. The stuck is thinking about, okay, what am I interested in that's going to be worth the work of pursuing and writing a novel or a original screenplay. Because sometimes it's interesting stuff, but does it make a story? Very often my job adapting something, when somebody would give me a magazine article or a book or something like that, I have to look at it and really ask that question: is there a movie here? Is there an arc here? Is there a story that one thing follows another, and the audience will get involved in how's this going to turn out? Sometimes there's a bunch of incredible events, but they don't come together in really a story. And either you have to find one there, invent one that may not be there, or say, I think this was fine as it was in the form that it came beforehand. However, the nice thing about history is somebody has written your plot for you. They've even made you a timeline, and you do that kind of research. And then you have this great framework to hang things on. And you kind of look at, okay, here's, Henry Ford and Rise and Fall, or whatever you want to call it. That's a lot of years. What section of that is there an arc that I can see? Not everybody's going to see it, but I can see there that I want to deal with. And then what are the events there that I want to drop the needle on and have the reader go there? And who am I going to have them see it with or through? So like in that little piece, we see it through 3 different people. Harry Bennett, who shows up in larger places otherwhere, in other chapters, and we see through his eyes. But the 3 of them, they would be there. The reporter would have to cover it. Harry Bennett did come out and get smashed on the head and knocked out, and may have shot some people before he did. And the character of Rosa, that's exactly the kind of person who wouldn't miss a march like that. So that's actually kind of helps things. It's when you're writing something that you're just making it up. It's more like free verse. There's no structure or anything like that to hang anything on, and it's actually, for me, a little bit harder.
Very interesting. And just very briefly, speaking of Mate One, so much of your work is in conversation with the current time that it was being made, even if it's a historical work.
Yeah.
For the first Trump administration, you may disagree, I didn't think that there was a lot of good art about the first Trump administration. And I'm curious what needs to change for that to happen, for better art to happen in this Trump administration.
I often think that there's not great stuff right while stuff is happening. There was a guy, Peter something, who I quoted some of his stuff in my book set around the 1900, A Moment in the Sun. And he had these characters, Mr. Dooley, and they were these Irish guys, and they would talk about world events right while they were happening. And it's very funny, even today, and you don't even have to know the events. He does the American Irish kind of thing very, very well. And that was like Saturday Night Live for its time. I think that's the kind of stuff that immediately is pretty good and useful. But I think to really have some perspective on it, it takes at least 10 years for people to really kind of say, geez, what happened there? And a lot of stuff doesn't come out right when it's happening. So we don't really know what was going on. and usually that it didn't come out on purpose.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, thanks for the reading.
Hi.
So I was reading about the Homestead steel strike, and I really didn't know much about it. And my question for you is, when there's these momentous labor movements in the U.S., it seems like over time and through history, the event's often forgotten, but we remember the tycoons, as flawed as they are, forever, and kind of we we lose a sense of who they were as like corporate titans and maybe ruthless business people. Why does that happen from your study? How does that happen where the labor movements are completely forgotten? We don't even know about them or honor them anymore.
Well, I think it's because there are Carnegie libraries all over the place, and there's a Ford Foundation, not a Kazimir Pilsudski Worker Foundation. There's a way that they have their, they can make big things. And some of them are, nice, and they're given to the people almost as an apology, or just kind of like, here, yeah, I can get people off my back for a while. Some of it's sincere. But yeah, I also think, those are often messy, and they're also often sad. When we made Matewan, it was about a thing called the Matewan Massacre. A massacre is not a pretty thing on either side. It was an ambush. So there, I think that kind of memory is, people in the labor movement, yeah, they like, they'll get somebody like Joe Hill to, write a song every once in a while that will remember some of these things, but mostly they want to move forward. And I think it's not a bad instinct not to dwell on the past too much. But to say, okay, what are the conditions now? The tactics we used back then don't work anymore. I mean, for instance, unions in America, two things happened. One was just natural, which was the industries that they were unionizing pretty much had to be where they were, either because there's the coal, that's where the industry is going to be. Or in the case of the auto industry, people have spent all this money to make the River Rouge factory or the Willow Run factory. They're not going to move it overnight. For another 20 years, if they're going to come out with a nickel in their pocket, they got to have cars coming out of there. So we've got them in a tough spot. And that's one of the reasons that unions can exist. And the other is, quite honestly, unions really didn't get much of a toehold until Franklin Roosevelt got in. And he realized, you know what? First of all, there's more votes there than these rich guys. And second of all, I think it's better for the country. And maybe I'll do something that's good for the country. And there won't be so many people starving in this country, if workers have some say in how they live and how they get paid.
Thanks a lot.
Anybody else?
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Darnice. Nice to meet you. I am the person I was talking to you about Brother from Another Planet. And I'm wondering if you were talking about inspiration. What inspired you to create this novel? And where, other than fever dreams, what inspires you to choose a novel over a screenplay, like as you're creating?
Yeah. I think the second part of that is usually just practical. Sometimes the scale of what I want to do, there's just no way I'm ever going to get, something like this would be a mini series that would last 4 years or something like that.
Which is not a bad
And
thing.
not many independent filmmakers can just say, "Oh, I'll make a mini series," and start a network to show that on. But very often it's something that I know enough about to be really interested in, but I don't know enough about that I don't want to learn more. So there were all kinds of things when I started doing the research for this book that I didn't know about what had happened in Detroit during this period. I got interested in Detroit a long time ago. Kind of growing up, it was, It's kind of like, Hollywood is the movies, Detroit was manufacturing. It was this busy, strong place where cars got built. And then early on in my lifetime, it started to fall off, fall off, fall off until 1968. There was a horrendous race riot. And then in 1980, I went there, was hired to cover, kind of as the color man, cover the 1980 Republican convention, the first Reagan convention that was held in the Joe Louis Arena. And I got to walk around Detroit a little, see it was in bad shape then. A lot of the automakers had pulled out. A lot of them were leaving without telling their workers. They were already making plans and building factories in other places to move out. It had gotten so funky at that point that the Republicans really didn't want they'd made the choice to have it there for whatever reason, but they didn't want their delegates to have to even look at it. So they housed at least half or more of them over in Canada, in Windsor, and brought them by bus across the bridge every day. And not only that, and this is something I saw with my own eyes, is they put cardboard in the windows so that nobody could look out and see funky Detroit on their way to the thing. So I got to, well, how does that happen? And what are the things? And over the years, I started thinking about the idea of Detroit as being in the North, this place where these big forces came together. Certainly, capital and labor, boom, punching away at each other. Races, because Henry Ford, for whatever his reasons, good or bad, he played African American workers the same as he paid white people for the same work. They weren't all janitor jobs. And when that word got out, people, as many people came to Detroit from the South, Black people, as they came to Chicago, and as did poor white people. And that eventually became something that, there weren't enough neighborhoods that could be kind of segregated from each other. And people, when World War II broke out, they had to put up kind of emergency housing out by Willow Run. And people were not only working in the same factory, they were living together. And it just blew up. And then during Prohibition, and this is not as well known because Chicago gets all the glory, all the good stuff, the manufactured liquor came from Canada in through Detroit. So, they had a really, really healthy mob scene there, and a lot of killing and a lot of colorful people. And there was this connection that through Harry Bennett, who kind of liked, meeting with mobsters and then telling Henry Ford what it was like. Henry Ford just was despairing as they had to now start putting his automobiles on trucks and sending them out to the rest of the country. He didn't want to pay the same wages as he was paying in the factory. And so Harry Bennett was always looking for some mob guy who had a company that did not pay Ford wages to do the job for them. So just that idea of it being a crucible always was interested in me. And then really the last piece that got me to say, okay, I'm going to do this. A couple of years ago, there was a wonderful book by Greg Grandin called Fordlandia about this adventure in Brazil where Henry Ford decided to grow his own rubber plants, and have a rubber plantation. So he bought a chunk of the Amazon in Brazil, the size of the state of Connecticut. And because he hated experts and guys who'd gone to college, he said, I've got all these guys I'm employing. I don't need wood because I needed them for Model Ts, but not Model As. They know how to cut down trees. Of course, they'll know how to grow trees. So that's who he sent down. Not a one spoke any Portuguese. And it was kind of his Vietnam. He spent millions and millions and not much rubber came back. I was asked by some producers to help them go around and pitch it to various of the streamers to see if they wanted to make a mini series of it. And just kind of learning that story, I realized, oh, this is the imperialist side of the story. This is a guy who just, he had the U.S. part down pat, and like a lot of people who get to that point and think they're geniuses, or in Henry Ford's case, he actually thought, I'm not that smart. I've been touched by something otherworldly, and I'm a vessel. Well, whoever's touching me is telling me, go to Brazil, buy a part of the Amazon, you'll be able to grow your own river. And it just seemed like, okay, that's it. We've got the imperialist part of the Ford Empire.
And that was all you needed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening, and thanks for being here. Unless it's a distraction, are you willing to talk about Ford and Hitler?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's in the book.
I was going to ask if it's in the book, but say what I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because Ford hated war. He decided during World War I, this is crazy, this is a waste, even though I'm making money on it. It's a stupid thing for people to be doing. So he chartered an ocean liner and got some anarchists and peaceniks and things like that on board. And they went over to Europe and parked and said, okay, France, Germany, Great Britain, come talk to me. I'll iron things out. He wasn't going for a Nobel Peace Prize. He just wanted to fix things. And nobody wanted to talk to him. And he came back kind of with his tail between his legs. Oh yeah, I shouldn't get involved in politics. He'd already run for senator once and lost by a few votes. He was not a fan of Hitler's. Hitler was a fan of his. Hitler had a picture of him over his desk. He kind of, the idea for the Volkswagen came from the Model T. He loved that idea of, at the River Rouge factory, iron ore and coal went in one end and cars came out the other end within 48 hours. That kind of production was really, and that kind of control that Henry Ford had. So basically what happened is that Ford's public relations guy, Ernest Leibold, which is a great name for a public relations guy, Leibold, was a German-American who was very much a fan of the Reich. And he's the one who brought the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which had recently been cooked up by this Russian con man, just kind of made up out of his head, to Ford and said, how you're always complaining about bankers and how, bankers are almost all Jewish and all that kind of, this explains it all. And Henry Ford, who was not very well educated, was a farm kid, everything fell into place. And so he serialized it like a Dickens novel in his publication. He then, when somebody from the press kind of cornered him about it, he said, well, my real problem is, these are people who, the whole bunch of them, they just push numbers around and nobody does any work, any real work. Name me one in Michigan, one Jewish farmer, and I'll pay him $10,000. And within an hour, there were like 200 people saying, come see my farm. And he didn't pay anybody, but he did have to apologize. So he kind of backed away from it. On the other hand, just on a practical level, his main architect was Jewish. He could sit down with people. He really, he kind of could sit down and talk to anybody in a way. So it was this strange ignorance that, and let's just say he was not alone. This was, Catholics were pretty dodgy at that time, even in Detroit.
Thank you. I look forward to your book.
Thanks. Anybody else? One more question. You can even shout it from where you are if you don't want to. Yes.
What's your favorite movie that you've made? Personally, I'm a big fan of Sunshine State.
Yeah, what tends to happen is you tend to have emotional feelings about where you were in the process of making it. So there are movies that I really like where they were just really tough, and everybody wasn't on the same page or whatever. We've been very lucky with crews generally. I would say that the two that really kind of jump out at me are Mate One, because we really made such a nice bond with the community. There were only 56 people in the town that we shot in, so it wasn't that big a community. And there was only one guy who said, "No, you can't shoot my house." So we had to like build a structure around his house, so we didn't see it. And then we got to make a movie, Sunshine State, where we lived on the beach. And the movie turned out fine, and I really liked the people and everything like that. But there was nothing like getting off work and then going out and swimming or running along the beach or whatever, and eating a lot of soft shell crab. Thanks, everybody. So I'm going to sign books somewhere and